Welcome to the 2021 State of the Region. I'm William Murdoch, Executive Director of the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. You know us as MORPC. We're so glad you're here today. It's been a difficult year. As we mourn those loved ones we've lost, we're humbled by the many unsung heroes and public servants who rose to the challenge to keep us healthy and connected to resources, and grateful for their dedication and hard work to navigate the unprecedented challenges of COVID-19, economic crisis, protests, and more. And through it all, MORPC's work for Central Ohio never stopped. Thank you to my team for their tenacity, creativity, and public service to meet your needs and stay focused on our future. You see, working together was more critical than ever, even if virtual. MORPC stayed connected through the year across the region with partners like local officials who rely on us for best practices in data, and professionals in transportation and sustainability, and the many, many people serving on our committees and working groups. But MORPC's work goes further. Some know us for Hyperloop, others weatherization. Some are students in planning or neighborhood advocates in trails or clean air. And perhaps some even found a better way to work through Ohio Commute. You see, at its heart, MORPC is Central Ohio's communities working together, 75 member cities, townships, counties, villages, and more. We're rural, suburban, and urban. Places small like Gambier, Heath, or Somerset, and large as Columbus or Delaware County, and county seats like Circleville, Bellefontaine, and more. We all work as neighbors to build a better region. To do this right, we have to include everyone and respect each other, whether you're old or young, minorities, new Americans, veterans, those with disabilities, and so many more. You see, there is a place for all of us as we envision and plan for Central Ohio's future. And we've all been hard at work. By this summer, nearly every MORPC plan and agenda will be up to date. And MORPC strategic frameworks knitting this all together. We're ready to build on the strengths you know us for: planning, transportation, data, sustainability, equity, and advocacy. And I know that envisioning the future sounds lofty, but know that we're grounded in practical action and impact, especially on three long-standing challenges that are now urgent: broadband, housing, and resources for communities. So first, let's start with MORPC's value to you and your community. Driving resources around the region to communities is always our top priority. So every year we share an ROI to show clear benefits to every member. And during the pandemic, we redoubled our efforts. MORPC convened over 50 urgent updates with health and emergency officials, experts, and even state and congressional leaders. But sometimes that most important outcome was just learning from our neighbors. Building relationships in a time like this is so critical. And it's how we can serve communities better as we get ready for recovery. And we're already preparing the region to recover. Partnered with One Columbus, we're creating a new economic development district so we can unlock new tools and grants. And county by county, we've updated the competitive advantage list. We know what infrastructure projects will advance jobs, and we're working to get them moving. And for businesses, we've developed a telework guide for employers and showcased incubators which strengthen local economies and grow our talented workforce. And it's so clear, Central Ohio cannot thrive without strong rural communities. That's why MORPC is holding rural forums on economic growth and community-led planning, and we provide them technical assistance in everything from water to transportation. Driving value to communities is job number one. Looking ahead, broadband and housing are the two most urgent needs we're working on. You see, broadband is critical. And you know MORPC's long been focused on data and digital infrastructure for our growing region. But during the pandemic, long-standing gaps and inequities in broadband became urgent. They now threaten our ability to recover. And during the crisis, our team moved quickly. We created a broadband access program with the Educational Service Center of Central Ohio, PCs for People, and many partners. This has assisted thousands of vulnerable families across the region with low-cost computers and hotspots. And MORPC's doing more. One example, we now co-lead the Franklin County Digital Equity Coalition, a new broad-based group advancing broadband and digital inclusion. Looking ahead, broadband access must remain a priority at all levels of government and business. It's critical. And this is why digital equity and broadband are top goals in MORPC's own policy agenda and regional data agenda too. It's so clear too, we can't be a smart region without broadband. And that's why MORPC's Smart Region Task Force focused on better preparing our communities for digital infrastructure. And a great example, the first in the country smart streets policy incorporating connectivity into every transportation project. It's a big deal. And you know, like broadband, Central Ohio's leaders agree housing is a big challenge. Our housing market consistently faces growth pressures and changing demographics. But just like broadband, the pandemic amplified long-standing affordability and equity gaps and undermined housing stability for so many. We have an alarming housing shortage at almost every level. It limits Central Ohio's ability to help neighbors in need and makes us less competitive in attracting people and business. But there's good news. MORPC's regional housing strategy, developed with 24 communities and partners, charts a path forward. Housing can be a platform for equitable growth and recovery. And this strategy has over 100 actions and a host of resources to build better, more inclusive communities. And we're continuing that conversation with a speaker series and peer exchanges and looking at providing more technical assistance in housing and everything from policy to communications. And you know, maintaining existing housing is a key part of that strategy. And MORPC's long worked at this through our home repair and weatherization programs. And let me tell you, I am especially proud of our residential services team this year. They overcame a 4-month shutdown, crisis assignments, and planning for extensive new safety standards to accomplish a miracle. They safely serviced 500 homes of 500 of our most vulnerable families in 8 months, almost as many as the full 12 months the year before. I'm so grateful and impressed by them. So it's clear, MORPC, we're focused on these urgent priorities like housing and broadband, and there's much more ahead and we'll need your help. But that traditional work you depend on us for never stopped. You know, it can be hard to plan for the future when you're in the middle of a crisis. But that's exactly what we did in transportation. Last year, MORPC updated the region's transportation improvement program and completed our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the multimodal vision for transportation representing $30 billion in projects over 30 years. And part of that makes it a priority to connect Central Ohio with other regions. So our work on Hyperloop advances, and MORPC and partners have prepared plans to reconnect Columbus with the nation's passenger rail system. It's pretty basic. Nearly every major region except Central Ohio is on that network. We can't truly compete without it. We plan for transportation in the future to be reliable, efficient, and accessible, one that's keeping the economy moving and improving our environment and quality of life, and one that's keeping everyone safe. And this is a big focus for us. Reducing serious crashes is a cornerstone of our work. The pandemic has made this even more difficult than ever because even as traffic declined, deaths and injuries are way up. This is devastating. It's unacceptable. We all have more to do. And at MORPC, our Central Ohio Transportation Safety Plan and regional forums, well, these are important next steps. And we should all support bold initiatives like Vision Zero Columbus. This is also why we unabashedly advocate for complete streets and press for distracted driving legislation. It's too important. We also want to ensure our transportation work fully considers equity, so we better understand and address the outsized burdens borne particularly by people of color. You know, MORPC's environmental work, it also continued unabated. An example, air quality. This was a big focus of the pandemic as air quality's relation to health, especially for kids, minority communities, and anyone with a breathing-related illness became more important. You know, water quality is another way we help communities with sustainability too, and we're proud to have kicked off the next phase of Sustaining Scioto to deepen understanding about our region's water in a changing climate. Greater impact, diversity, and new locally based action, well, these are core features of our updated regional sustainability agenda, and there'll be much more to report at the Summit on Sustainability in the fall. And this has been an intense year for state and federal action too. And so MORPC's public policy team kept us all focused on advocacy and quick changing updates. We developed a new public policy agenda focused on those core strengths: transportation, sustainability, data, broadband. And we added a new priority on racial and social justice to strengthen our commitment to do more to address racism and inequity. And we've joined regional partners in advocating for economic development, sustainable growth, and federal funding. And we're providing new support to the Central Ohio Defense Group. You see, MORPC members believe strongly in public service. Good government depends on it. And that's why we're partnered with Ohio University's Voinovich School to help local governments pursue advanced degrees, place interns, and to provide training for newly elected officials. So the policy year ahead is a busy one. There's possibilities in broadband, housing, infrastructure, and yes, even earmarks. Together with you, we're going to help secure the policies and funding our region needs. That's all just a taste of how MORPC is working with you to help the region. Let's put it more simply. We're honored to serve you. Central Ohio is an incredible place to call home. This doesn't happen by accident. You need smart leadership, relentless collaboration, and sometimes thankless public service. And that's why MORPC lifts up dedicated individuals and collaborative achievements in our annual awards. These winners over the year represent an incredible community legacy. And today's awardees continue that tradition with inspiring work. We're so proud to recognize and thank them. And you'll hear from our MORPC leadership, our board officers, as we do this. So let's start the awards with MORPC's board secretary and Dublin Mayor, Chris Amoros-Grooms.
Thank you, William, for your opening remarks. MORPC is fortunate to have an extremely devoted and talented team that is always willing to go the extra mile to improve our community and provide value to its members. As the Mayor of the City of Dublin and Secretary of MORPC's board, I am honored today to present the William H. Anderson Excellence in Public Service Award. This award recognizes a current or past MORPC board member who has made a significant contribution to MORPC, the community, and our region. William H. Anderson, a longtime MORPC board member, was the epitome of a civic volunteer who is remembered for the zeal with which he championed MORPC's vision and goals. This year's award recipient is the City of Whitehall Mayor Kim Maggard. Congratulations, Kim.
The Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission is fortunate to have many friends, whether it's those in business, education, nonprofits, or simply residents who are passionate about sustainable development and mobility. But it's local government officials who are at the heart of MORPC's work, driving the agency forward. Highly regarded for her tremendous leadership in transforming the city of Whitehall, Kim Maggard is a highly visible mayor who encourages citizen engagement and brings the best out of those with whom she works. Whether it's to MORPC, to the several boards on which she sits, or to the thousands of residents she serves, Mayor Maggard is known to give the gift that many consider most precious, her time. As a passionate public servant, she dedicates herself to truly understanding regional plans and initiatives, envisioning how they can come to pass at the community level, and then taking action. At MORPC, the mayor takes a lead role in guiding the direction of the agency as a member of its executive committee. As a former chair of the Regional Policy Roundtable, she set herself apart as an inclusive collaborator to guide the public policy efforts of MORPC and its member communities. Closer to home, Mayor Maggard was an early adapter of the goals set through MORPC's Sustainable 2050 program, actions that are making a true and lasting impact in the city of Whitehall. During her tenure, she has spearheaded sweeping and impactful redevelopment, adding modern amenities to the community. Furthermore, her initiatives have led to increased home ownership, improved aesthetics, and programs that are helping those who are addicted to drugs get back on their feet. Through all of these endeavors, Mayor Kim Maggard has not only learned from other communities throughout the region, she has positioned Whitehall as an example that other communities can learn from.
Congratulations, Mayor Maggart. I'm Eric Janis, and I serve as Vice Chair of MORPC's board. Today, I'm honored to announce the recipient of the 2021 Regional Leadership Award, which recognizes people in our 15-county region who make extraordinary efforts in the future of their communities. This award represents MORPC's dedication to addressing issues that go beyond community boundaries and that embrace visionary thinking. This year's award recipient is my friend Trudy Bartley, Associate Vice President of Local Government and Community Relations at The Ohio State University.
There are many traits of a leader, but two of the most remarkable are that they bring others along with them to realize a vision, and they inspire others to lead. Throughout the course of her career, Trudy Bartley has certainly proven to be an effective regional leader. Now serving as the Associate Vice President of Local Government and Community Relations at The Ohio State University. Trudy has worked throughout her career to bring about positive change for Central Ohio and beyond. Whether at Ohio State, Partners Achieving Community Transformation, or PACT, in development roles for the state of Ohio and the city of Columbus, or on the many boards and commissions on which she has been actively engaged, Trudy has consistently demonstrated that by setting a strategic direction and gracefully working to complete tasks along the way, we can achieve and exceed our goals. In addition to encouraging others to take on leadership roles, in particular, women, Trudy sets an example for others in how they can be successful and impact the future. Perhaps most notable is how she uses her strength at negotiating to create partnerships and engage to improve outcomes. Her accumulated experience and influence among others has led to an improved quality of life for a wide spectrum of people. As an advocate for a more inclusive community, one where all residents can enjoy access to amenities and opportunities, Trudy has especially made a difference with the redevelopment of the Near East Side neighborhood where she grew up. Through all of her professional work, volunteer service, and mentorship, Trudy Bartley is a beacon for how we can bring about transformational change in our community. Thank you, Trudy.
Congratulations, Trudy. I'm Karen Angelou, and I have the pleasure of serving as a Gahanna City Council member and as chair of MORPC's board. Today, I have the honor of presenting the William C. Habig Collaborative Achievement Award. This honor represents outstanding efforts and innovation in creating partnerships and sharing resources. The award captures the dedication to collaboration of Bill Habig. Bill served as MORPC's executive director for over 30 years, and today he continues to serve the region as a current MORPC board member representing Granville Township. The award this year is recognizing an extremely deserving group of professionals, the Central Ohio Public Health Districts. We cannot thank you all enough for everything you have done over the past year to keep everyone in Central Ohio safe and healthy.
Collaboration takes place every day in Central Ohio, but rarely does it take place under such serious circumstances as life or death. For more than a year, the COVID-19 pandemic has wreaked havoc on the health of our loved ones here in Central Ohio, across the nation, and around the world. Through it all, our region's local health departments, at both the city and county levels, have risen to the occasion, working non-stop 24/7 to keep our more than 2.3 million residents safe and seeing us through these challenging times. Whether it is public health, nursing, physicians, and epidemiologists, or other health department professionals, including registered sanitarians, health educators, or administrators, they continue to work together to provide vital information, to reach vulnerable populations, and to provide care. And it's through their care that many of us have found comfort and hope. These challenges of the past year have demonstrated the importance of having public health professional and frontline workers to be there when we most need them, to develop good health policy, and to safely guide the region as we turn the corner and adjust to what is ahead. For these reasons and more, we thank them, all of them, for what they have done, what they are doing, and what they will yet do for us.
Well, how wonderful were those recognitions? Congratulations to Central Ohio's health districts for extraordinary public service during a difficult year. Your work is keeping us safe, it gives us hope, and we know you're not done, and we'll support you all the way. And congrats to Trudy and Mayor Maggard. Central Ohio is so grateful for your leadership, and I'm grateful for your mentorship and friendship too. The impact of your work is critical, and you know what? It's inspiring tomorrow's leaders. Thank you. And thanks to our MORPC board officers too. Their support and their leadership for me and our team at MORPC, it's incredible. So speaking about tomorrow, MORPC's focus is to envision and build a future for the whole region. In our work together with you, planning for equity and raising awareness about racial and social justice are cornerstone and common sense values. You know, Central Ohio is more diverse than ever. Racial and ethnic minorities are expected to account for most of our region's growth between now and 2050. Our region's diversity is and will be our strength. But too many Central Ohioans, our neighbors and colleagues, experience discrimination on race, gender, veteran status, and so much more. This holds us all back. It makes real prosperity much harder to achieve as we grow. We just can't accept this as status quo. And that's why over the past year, MORPC looked closely at our own efforts, and not just at our diversity policies, but also at our transportation, sustainability, data, policy, and housing work to ensure that we're planning for all residents. And more than ever, we're prioritizing engaging everyone, rural, suburban, urban, early in our planning process. Because connecting new voices, sharing more helpful updates, that helps us envision and prepare for our region's future together. So thank you to our local government leaders, our committee members, and the MORPC team for making this a priority. Together we've made big strides, but there is much more to do. Know that we're committed to the work ahead. Now let's take a moment to highlight a few of MORPC's programs and services, creating more equity and building prosperity for Central Ohio. Let's keep our focus going and turn our attention now to compelling personal stories from around our region. To set the stage for our keynote, we have a few short Pecha Kucha style presentations. Here are the basics if you're not familiar. Each presenter gets 20 slides shown for only 20 seconds each, meaning each talk will be brief yet full of powerful information. We're lifting up a number of really impressive individuals today, and I'm so excited for you to hear their voices. But I'm really excited to start with somebody I work with every day. When she came to MORPC from Gahanna and started as our Director of Communications and Engagement 2 years ago, we knew we had gained a passionate expert who would strengthen not only our communications, but our member services, diversity, and events like this. You're just gonna love hearing from her. So here's MORPC's very own Niel Jurist, fierce, compassionate, chaos calmer.
In 1865, with the end of the Civil War and the abolishment of slavery, we have the Great Migration, a time where 6 million African Americans migrated from the rural southern states to the Northeast, Midwest, and Western regions in search of better opportunities for economic and political advancement. The 1920s, often known as the Roaring Twenties or the Harlem Renaissance, was an exciting time in this country, but especially for Black people. It was a time of intellectual and cultural awakening for our music, dance, art, fashion, literature, and politics. Among some of the key influences of the time were poet Langston Hughes, author, playwright, filmmaker Zora Neale Hurston, one of the founding fathers of jazz, Louis Armstrong, and activists like W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey. In fact, it was a spiritual coming of age and defining moment for Black Americans, a time dedicated to Black pride, cultural identity, political advancement, and economic self-sufficiency. As the great poet Langston Hughes once said, it was an expression of our individual dark-skinned selves. It was also a critical time for Black sororities like my own, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and other sororities and Black fraternities to shape their agenda and take bold action to address the most pressing issues of the day, like lynching, voter suppression, and other Jim Crow era-like laws, in order for us to obtain a piece of the American dream. During this time, we also see the formation of organizations like the National Association of Advancement of Colored People, or also known as the NAACP, working with community leaders to end segregation, discrimination in housing, education, employment, to oppose racism, and to ensure Black Americans of their constitutional rights. As racial tensions continued to grow throughout the United States, the lynching of Black Americans became a common occurrence. Lynching became a popular method white people used to resolve their anger toward newly freed Black people who they felt were taking their jobs. But despite the progress being made, segregation was very much alive. With the institution of systemic racism, or more simply put, assigned places, Black people were forced into substandard spaces separate and not equal to white people. In the mid-1920s, Gahanna was a small rural village located just outside of Columbus. Located within the village was an African-American man by the name of William Jones. He owned a few parcels of land. His daughter Cora was the first African-American to graduate from Gahanna High School in 1913. In 1925, in the height of racism and segregation, African-American leaders were looking for a rural retreat, a safe place to gather. In response to these needs, the Rocky Fork Outing Club was formed, and from that evolved the Big Walnut Country Club. The articles of incorporation for this new club were signed by its founders, Nimrod Allen, Charles E. Jones, Elijah Calloway, John Bowles, Leroy Goodman, William Method, William Woodland, and R. Milton Tibbet. All of these men were accomplished in their own careers as doctors, dentists, and leaders within their own community. Many of them were active in the church, the Spring Street YMCA, the Columbus Urban League, and all but one of the founders were members of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, the first Black Greek letter fraternity established for African American men in 1906 on the campus of Cornell University. Over the next 40 years, the club flourished. the Big Walnut Country Club became a premier place for many prominent African Americans to network, socialize, meet, and discuss the critical issues of the day. The Country Club hosted a variety of events, including beauty pageants to crown the Miss Merrymakers, concerts featuring jazz greats like Cab Calloway, sporting events like baseball and volleyball tournaments, leisure activities like golfing, cookouts, ceremonies, conventions, and much more. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, we start to see more integrated events thanks to a shift in attitudes towards segregation. The Loving Act of 1967 allowed my Black mother and white Jewish father to marry in 1970, and I'm proud to say that they're still together and recently celebrated their 51st wedding anniversary. But despite significant progress, the 1960s was a time of heightened racial tensions, leading to protests and civil unrest, a time where redlining, zoning codes, and easement policies were enacted to restrict Black people from visiting places and living in certain spaces. A combination of these unintended consequences of these events and the passing of the club manager, Ernest Tate, had a profound impact on the club. In 1960, an easement was put in place that restricted access to the club, the parking lot, the club grounds, resulting in membership dwindling. In the late 1960s, after years of inactivity, the club was closed. In the 1970s, the site of the club was acquired by the village of Gahanna, and then the following year, the village opened its first park, Friendship Park, on the site of the former country club. Today, much like its name, Friendship Park is a welcoming place where many people in the community gather for recreational activities, sporting, community concerts, and other events. After more than 60 years since the Big Walnut Country Club opened, and more than 40 years since the club closed, there have been some efforts to highlight the significant cultural history through news articles, interviews with former members, a feature in PBS's Columbus Neighborhood segment, the annual story trail, and a mural in downtown Columbus. Telling the story of the Big Walnut Country Club is the first step in healing and reconciling the past. My hope is that Gahanna will continue to find ways to honor the significance of one of the first Black country clubs in the nation. Whether it's an annual event or permanent physical structure, I implore you to keep the legacy of this club alive so that its history is not lost on future generations.
Next up is Wendy Crump, a Bronzevillian, spontaneous, and lover of the world.
As a member of the Bronzeville Urban Redevelopment Initiative and a licensed real estate agent with Caldwell Banker Realty, I find myself in interesting situations daily. I get invited inside homes, I hear stories, family histories, the next step in life, and so on and so on. Columbus is known for and proud of our different neighborhoods: German Village, Italian Village, Victorian Village, Dublin, and so forth. The one neighborhood rarely spoke of and lost in the history books is Bronzeville. The story of a Bronzevillian is a bit different. For starters, what is bronze? It's a metal stronger than copper, but when mixed with other metals becomes more fusible and easier to cast and far more resilient to corrosion. The neighborhood was originally a mix of Italians, Jewish, Irish, and majority Afro-Americans who all came together to work on the railroads. The city of Columbus was chosen as the capital of Ohio primarily because it was centralized and had easy access to transportation routes, which essentially were the rivers. Columbus in its infancy stage in the 1800s had around 500 free blacks, and by the time the big migration wave came by 1920, over 22,000 black residents. And the main reason blacks stopped in Columbus as opposed to factories in Cleveland or moving further north or west was because of the Ohio State University. In Columbus, Ohio, we had more educated African Americans than any other northern city. In 1894, a group of black business entrepreneurs formed the Afro-American Association of Columbus, Ohio, and the purpose of this organization was to represent unity of its residents since there were only a few avenues of employment and business open to the men and women of our race. With that being said, Bronzeville was by design, having every business and neighbor tending to every need. Black doctors and dentists with degrees from Ohio State, hat makers, barbers, small grocers, dressmakers, shoe shiners, bar owners, and then progressing to building our own hospital, bank and insurance companies, churches and funeral homes, all within the community. So before the walkability measure was a thing, you could have everything you needed within a mile. These same developers and entrepreneurs that built Bronzeville then continued to honor their wives and mothers by naming great buildings after them, like the Edna, the Marguerite, and the Teresa. There was a demand for housing as well as the number of trained black real estate agents that tripled. And so by 1930, there were 18 black realtors who were closely associated with the black-owned banks. So every building that housed the business were 100% funded and built by black businesses and masons. The $1 Million Mile, also known as the Long Street and Mount Vernon, was a commercial corridor that housed great entertainment from jazz greats and lined with jazz clubs to accommodate artists traveling for the entertainment route from Harlem to Chicago, with a pit stop in Columbus. A thriving community for African Americans is an understatement, seeing it survived the First and Second World War, the Great Depression. Now, the first cause of any decrease in the population and economy of Bronzeville occurred just after desegregation, when African Americans were taking their business elsewhere to expand. Schools now being integrated took families from Bronzeville. The second extreme blow to the neighborhood came in the late 1950s with the ratification of the Highways Act, Interstate 71 and 670, tearing down hundreds of homes that were black-owned. The war on drugs in the late 70s and 80s led to an insanely high rate of incarceration, which robbed the black family of basic rights, the ability to raise our children or even vote, combined with non-incarcerated families being redlined. The tension that is now happening from today is from festering wounds from the past. For example, lynching. Lynching defined is the murder of an individual without the regard to legal process, to due process. In many cases, law enforcement could look the other way. The anti-lynching began this legislative process back during the Civil Rights era in the 60s and only just passed in 2018 because the killings of African Americans without due process was too much for any human to have to go through. And as Americans, we must acknowledge our past, inform our present, and create our future. The Long Street Bridge is the beginning of bridging the gap between the divided amongst us. Not only does the artwork honor our ancestors and visually see a friendly reminder of where we come from, community leaders working with ODOT spent over $25 million to make sure the bridge could supply electricity and lights to have restaurants to accommodate over $100 million being spent on development today. The board development team listened to the community for the Adelphi Quarters project with roughly 9,000 square feet of commercial space and 130 boutique apartments, and continued tradition with honoring a living legend, Ann B. Walker, an African-American woman of many firsts. The Bronzeville Neighborhood Association has collaborated with Bethany Presbyterian Church to build mixed-income housing. Arch City Development is seeking to build 750 East Broad Street, a 4-story building with 36 apartments. Our city is developing like rapid fire, and Columbus should be the metropolis that leads by example. We are literally the heart of America. We have been told that you are as weak as the weakest link, and this is only half the truth. We are also as strong as our strongest link. I encourage everyone to help fulfill our work in knitting back the fabric of Bronzeville and sustainable development for all people, and remember our great history and come together and make America not great, but even better. Thank you.
And finally, we have Ernie Bynum, a U.S. Air Force veteran, entrepreneur, and philanthropist.
Since the writing of the Constitution of America, African Americans have always been seen as less than human. We were deemed 3/5 of a human being. This lack of humanity led to many problems, and these problems still exist to this day. In order for us to move forward as a country, these issues must be addressed. In the beginning of America, even during slavery, African Americans have always been philanthropic. We gave of our times, our talents, and treasures for our very survival. This made sure the next generation had a better quality of life. African American giving was also done unrecognized, unnoticed, behind the scenes. No publicity. This is what we thought we were supposed to do. This is how we were raised. To be able to give our times, talents, and treasures to help anyone in need. Most philanthropy in the African American community is done through our churches. Even though this was met with tremendous backlash, destruction of property, even death, we were excluded from organized traditional philanthropy. However, it did not stop our progress. The greatest social justice movement in this country was the Civil Rights Movement. This movement could only have been done by communities coming together, sharing their times, their talents, and their treasures with one another. This helped our country move forward. Even today, the African American philanthropy goes unrecognized and unnoticed. This is because our giving has been identifying the immediate needs and addressing those in our community. This has left little time for building resources for the future. What do we need? The African American Community Fund. The African American Community Fund was established January 2020 at the Foundation for Appalachian Ohio. We are committed to gathering and sustaining resources for the 32 counties in Appalachian Ohio. The African American Community Fund offers an opportunity to create and sustain permanent resources for the African American community in Appalachian Ohio. Through this philanthropic vision, the African American Community Fund will be able to address disparities in the African American community today, and we'll also be able to address those disparities that rise in the future. Together, we strengthen one another. The African American Community Fund partnered with the Foundation for Appalachian Ohio, and we're leading the way in Appalachian Ohio to show what communities can do together to achieve greatness and move forward. By supporting and enhancing strategic initiatives in the African American community, we strengthen not only the African American population, but the population as a whole in the 32 region. Entire communities will benefit. At the end of 2020, the African American Community Fund, thanks to the Foundation for Appalachian Ohio, partnered up and gave out its first round of grant making. $10,000 were awarded to 6 different organizations in the region. Action. The Alliance for Congressional Transformation in our neighborhoods, they addressed the issue of food deserts, food insecurities. They found ways to prep organic foods and team up with local growers. Go Community Development Corporation. They opened up a shoe closet at their local center. This allowed them to provide shoes to adults and youth during the summer and back to school. Our grant also allowed them to purchase winter attire for individuals in their community. The John G. Black Historical Center. This center had a digital learning initiative. This learning initiative, new technology, and connectivity allows them to have a further outreach about the history of the Underground Railroad. United Returning Citizens. Assisting United Returning Citizens, this group of individuals had essential COVID-19 handmade baskets that were issued to individuals that were incarcerated and those in the community. This gave the individuals a sense of belonging in their community. The Carver Community Center. During the pandemic, many adults had to deal with remote learning. They stepped up and provided daycare, affordable daycare. They provided food. They provided socialization for the children, internet access, all while the caregiver was working. The Underground Railroad Museum. The Underground Railroad Museum had an extensive research where they created a web page where they were able to digitally have individuals come to their site and identify spots to view photos, stories, and pictures to further their education about the Underground Railroad. We have made so much progress in America, and yet we have so much farther to go. If America is going to live up to the promises that she's made on paper, we must all work together as one. How can you help? Go check out the Foundation for Appalachian Ohio and find the African American Community Fund. Any gift that you give, no matter the size, will have an immediate impact and will last for generations to come. Thank you, and God bless you.
What impressive personal talks. I'm just so moved and I learned so much. We're going to be featuring these on MORPC's website afterwards, and we know there are so many other stories around the region that can be shared. So please share those with us. We appreciate Wendy, Ernie, and Niel so much. So now we want to focus on 3 exciting initiatives for the future. First, let's take a look at the Linkus Mobility Initiative. MORPC's partnered with Columbus, CODA, and others to create a complete, connected transportation system along key corridors, including advanced rapid transit, smart tech, and a robust bike and pedestrian network. Linkus adds value to existing neighborhoods, and it's tied to strategies for infill and new development, giving everybody better access to more housing choices and quicker pathways to jobs. After all, our region's quality of life, our health, our environment depends on how well we move around. And that's why this is the year of MORPC's Active Transportation Plan. Our focus is on how residents and visitors can safely and comfortably travel by foot, bike, wheelchair, and more. Simply put, we all want to live in a place with easy mobility for everyone. Let's work to turn this vision into reality. And one last thought. Our home is a beautiful place. Central Ohio is blessed with scenic streams and forests and gently rolling plains. This subtle beauty is the backdrop for over 200 miles of greenways, with plans to add 500 more. It's about recreation and health and transportation. And all of Central Ohio agrees on one thing: we want more. But what if we boldly envisioned not just more trails, but a world-class system touching every neighborhood with easy connections and a focus on equity? What if we could create the largest interconnected green space network in the country? One with new access to mountain biking, kayaking, and running trails, and of course, ice cream and breweries along the way. It's a compelling vision, and it's a fun one. And we're taking the next step by launching the Rapid 5 initiative with the Urban Land Institute Columbus, Metro Parks, and many public and private partners. And we'll need your help and creative ideas to make Rapid 5 happen. So check your email this Friday as we collectively announce how your voice can be heard. These 3 things will require vision and talent and youthful energy. So I'm really excited to share today that we're kicking off a new partnership. So let's hear a little bit about that from Jennifer Peterson, Chief Executive of Easton.
Thank you, William. On behalf of the Easton Community Foundation, I'm thrilled to be joining you and so many civic leaders from across the region today. Central Ohio's future is bright. And as we grow, we know working together is what creates a more connected and sustainable community. To do that right, we need to nurture new talent in public service today to help communities plan for a better tomorrow. That's why I'm pleased to announce a new partnership between the Easton Community Foundation and MORPC, the Easton Future Vision Fellows. With support and guidance from The Ohio State University Knowlton School, 4 top planning students will work in and with communities to envision a better future. This year, the Future Vision Fellows will focus on trails and greenways, building on the enthusiasm and work in the region for creating a world-class accessible network. With a priority on equity, they'll work on advancing new neighborhood connections, creating new experiences, and bringing the best innovative ideas for everything from new businesses to family fun. Through hands-on experience and public service, fellows will build their own professional skills while helping our region be prepared for the future. We'll top it off by highlighting their wonderful work at next year's State of the Region. Thank you, William, again, and MORPC. We're excited to support the effort. I'm looking forward to the Easton Future Fellows and the work ahead.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you to the Easton Foundation. We're so excited about the Easton Future Vision Fellows and the work to be done on Rapid 5. It's going to be a great start to the summer in this really important program for Central Ohio. Next, I have the honor of introducing our 2021 State of the Region keynote. As we envision our future together, we're so excited to welcome Jonathan Rose. Mr. Rose's business, public policy, writing, and nonprofit work focuses on creating more economically, socially, and environmentally resilient communities. He has a BA from Yale and received a master's in regional planning from the University of Pennsylvania. He's the founder of Jonathan Rose Companies, a multidisciplinary development, planning, project management, and investment firm. He also advises communities around the globe on things like planning, affordable housing, environmental and social issues too. And you should read his book. It's titled The Well-Tempered City: What Modern Science, Ancient Civilizations, and Human Nature Teach Us About the Future of Urban Life. Jonathan, we sure wish we could welcome you to Central Ohio in person today, but we're so grateful that you're with us virtually. So we're all looking forward to your insight and conversation. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, and I'm so excited to be here, and I wish that I was there in person too, and look forward to actually being with you in person sometime in the future. Somebody needs to enable my screen sharing because I have a PowerPoint that I need to show. So can the host do that? Okay. I get a message that says host has disabled my ability to share the screen. So I need you guys to be able to let me show a PowerPoint. Otherwise, I'll just, okay, there we go. Great. One second. So can everybody see this image? I hope you can. So I want to talk to you about planning for an equitable future in this region. And first, I'm going to give you some just big global facts and information that you may have already covered today. And the first is that the world is very rapidly urbanizing. This is in Bangkok in Thailand. And so the United States is competing globally all over the place with very sophisticated and rising economies. And as we've seen, the capital is very mobile, and even labor can be mobile. Certainly ideas are mobile. This is creating infrastructure problems, and we're fortunate there's an infrastructure bill that's being announced today that I think will be really critical for the United States. The American Society of Civil Engineers ranks our current infrastructure is D, and that we need many, many trillions of dollars to bring it up to the 21st century state that it needs for us to be able to compete. And Ohio is really lucky in having two senior leading senators who are really good thinkers about infrastructure and really well positioned, and encouraged this region to be engaged in that dialogue in thinking about what is the infrastructure you want for the future, and making sure that the funding is there for it. This is really, I think, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to put in place the infrastructure that's really necessary to power our regions forward. These are just some quick images of climate change I want to skip because we don't have a lot of time. But this is, for example, in China, they've put in over 25,000 miles of high-speed rail, which means that what were once considered secondary cities are now major cities because they're all interconnected in what are economists call an interaction sphere. And it's really important. That's one of the major attributes of what infrastructure can do. And as Ohio thinks about its role, and obviously the Columbus region in the larger regional and even national economy, it's good to really map out what are the intersection points, where are they weak, and where would you like to see them strengthened. This is an image of Sao Paulo, luxury apartments on one side and poverty on the other. The issue of rising inequality is a very significant one in the United States. We came out of the 2008 recession with essentially what's called as a K-shaped economy, in which those who were doing well did much, much better. There was prosperity for the top 10% and definitely 1%, and but for much of working America came out worse. And we're seeing the seeds of that again. We're just beginning to see the glimmers of what the exit from the COVID-based recession will be. And I think we really, really have to take care in our regional economies, our local economies, state economies, to try and equalize the landscape of opportunity as much as possible. This has been a key part of the American dream. I believe the American vision is imperfect, but one of the things we really have to offer the world is this view that everybody has a chance in the United States. And we're seeing distortions to that. I'm going to talk about some of those, but I really think that now is the time to try and figure out, before this resurgence from the pandemic goes too far, to make it as equal a resurgence as possible. What happens when there isn't equality is that we get political dissonance and, in some cases, violence. This happened. This is 2011 in England. In London, there were all of a sudden these riots broke out, and they were completely unpredicted. This is a Google map. The deeper the red, the greater the poverty. And where all the little points are is where the riots took place. And you'll see they're not in the poorest neighborhoods. They're actually in the neighborhoods where the lower middle class was adjacent to a middle class neighborhood. And there was enormous frustration because the families in the lower middle class neighborhoods felt that it was just impossible for them to move forward. And that reached a boiling point. So it's just a note of caution. This is a map of intergenerational poverty in the United States. So if you were born in 1940 and you turned 26 in 1966, and you were born in a bottom quartile income family, there was a 90% chance that you would do better than your low-income parents. And this was across all races. So for example, when a lot of sharecroppers' children in the South moved to North to good union jobs. There were a whole series of demographic and economic reasons why America was such an amazing landscape of opportunity then. This map shows us if you were born in 1990 and you turned 26 in 2016, and you were born in a bottom quartile family, there was a 90% chance, there's a 70% chance that you would actually do worse than your low-income parents. So we've gone completely backwards in terms of opportunity. And in this map, the deeper the red, the less likely you're going to do better than your parents. So, there's an organization called Opportunity Insights that has all this data. You can go to their website. If you've not been looking at it, I think it's really important to look at, to understand in the region where the opportunity is and isn't. They categorize it all by zip code, and to try and figure out how, again, we can make America its dream, which is to be a land of opportunity. At the same time, things like auto manufacturing, cars are all being made by robots. We're seeing fewer and fewer jobs in the future economy. So one of the things that I just heard a little bit of the last session on some Futures Fellows, and this is one of the things I wanted to encourage you. I gave a talk to Fort Collins, and the city of Fort Collins has something called its Futures Committee, which is part of the city council, which actually said, we're trying to envision what we want Fort Collins to be 30 years from now. And then we're going to think about how do we design the fiscal, social, and environmental conditions, and how do we track them to get there. It's very hard to have substantial change in 3 or 5 years. But if you have a vision for the community that you want to be, those aspects that you love today that you want to preserve, and those that you want to become or rebalance 30 years from now, that's the time frame in which you can really make steps today. And each one will unfold one step to the next, and you will be able to become the community that you hope to be in the 30 years. So, nothing better than a nonpartisan regional planning group to be the host of such a future planning effort. We've seen this, by the way, in the New York region with the Regional Plan Association and many other places. So you are at the right place to really be thinking about your long-range future. When we think at the biggest scale about what we call planetary health, there are 4 pathways that everything divides into 4 components. The first is half Earth. So a great biologist, E.O. Wilson, has come up with this idea that we need to preserve half of the Earth's surface, both land and water, for nature. And otherwise, we're going to have ecological collapse. And he's done some very interesting work on where those areas should be. Biden administration has announced a plan called 30 by 30, which is to preserve 30% of the United States by 2030. And what's really interesting is when we get to the next slide section, which is called ecological civilization, what we're seeing is a rapidly growing desire from around the world to integrate urbanism and nature. The people actually are wanting to live in higher density, more walkable communities, more diverse and more connected with mass transit. And yet they, at the same time, want to be deeper in nature. And what we've been seeing is this is possible. That cities like Singapore, for example, have increased building heights and density so that they can actually eliminate roads and create more parks and open space to surround those buildings. But so as we a really good regional plan would think about open space corridors where connected pathways for nature, and then actually how those weave into our cities. We need to think of what's called a regenerative economy. Much of our economy today is based on extraction, or it's based on consuming the commons. We know this, for example, from the point of view of air pollution, that it may enhance a business's prospects if it doesn't spend as much money cleaning up its air pollution or water pollution, but ultimately it's undermining the commons. So the interesting question of this one of what is a regenerative economy? A regenerative economy is one that says that the social commons, the economic commons, the environmental commons is actually of enormous value. And how can we create businesses that enhance the commons? And I believe that those regions that have more regenerative approaches to businesses are going to be the ones that are going to be the most resilient and the ones that are going to thrive the most in the long term. And the last is pervasive altruism. To be able to do this, we actually have to shift our mental model. We have, for much of the 20th century, focused on a model. It's been a mixed model, actually. America has seen enormous in the 20th century, we saw great civic moments and civic movements and development of extraordinary communities and community organizations. But we also saw a real economic focus on the individual and the firm. And what we've learned is we're never going to achieve these other parts of planetary health, the preservation of land, the creating of an ecological civilization, and transforming the economy without an underlying view that we're all in it together. And that we actually, an altruistic sense for all is a really key critical part. Now, because you're planners and thinking about planning, I'm going to give you a thought about planning. And this comes from thinking about how nature functions. So in nature, the building blocks of nature are proteins, or what they call the proteome is the vast array of all the proteins in nature. And the metabolomics, which are the metabolism, so the flow of energy, information, and materials through a natural system. The metagenomics, which is the gene pool, which designs what all of life is, and the epigenetics, which is a feedback loop. So let's think about this as from a planning system. So if the genomics, the metagenomics, the foundation of it all were our master plans, our building codes, our zoning codes, et cetera. That's really the planning of how we build our civilizations. The metabolomics are the materials, water, energy, markets, incentives, the way money, materials, people, all those things flow through our markets. We make these things, we actually build our civilization, we build our villages and towns and cities out of materials, buildings, infrastructure. We are, we may be getting more and more digital, but we're still physical stuff-based civilization. And a feedback loop. So if you think about it, in many cases, towns do plans. They do master plans once every 20 years. They may revitalize their zoning code maybe 15 or 20 years. And their building codes are very slow moving. And yet we're in a much more dynamic system. And what I'm suggesting is that with the extraordinary advances in big data and in GIS systems, in remote sensing, in all the information that we have, we can be much more dynamic. Now, what it takes is a vision. Usually a good vision is 20 or 30 years now, a plan. And then from that, community health indicators, which I'm going to talk about, and those lead to regulations, investments, incentives. You measure your outcomes, and you compare to the community health indicators, and you keep this cycle going. So I don't know if you have community health indicators for this region, but so for example, here's a vision that in 2005 that people of Portland put together. Is interesting because for Portland, this reflected higher density buildings. They wanted them to be green, so they had solar on the side and wind on the roof, neither of which worked, by the way, but in this image, it was just symbolic. They said we wanted multiple means of transportation. So they had buses and green cars and bicycles and people walking and a light rail system. They said we want to match density with parks and open space. So to the right is the building and the left you can see is the entry to a park. They wanted to tie into their regional food system. And so you see somebody selling local fruit from it says Oregon grown. And they wanted their cities to be family-friendly places. And so you see a small child indicating familyness. So they took all these complex characteristics, and there's a 100-page report behind this, but they brought it together in an image that was very clear and kind of communicated a feeling tone and many of the details, too, of where they wanted to go. We find this is really, really essential component of regional planning to have if there's much consensus on a vision of what kind of place and places that you want to be. And then what's so interesting is you can break that down into indicators, and we now have so much data. And one of the great things about crowdsourcing the idea of indicators is you don't have to limit to it 100 or 200 or whatever. So there's not a debate between your indicators and my indicators. We can have both of them. So if you look at this, it's everything from bicycle lanes and bus ridership to water use, energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, percentage of green construction, accessibility of parks, voter participation in off-year elections as a sign of civicness, economic opportunity for businesses, student alcohol abuse rates, student safety in schools, student school performance in terms of grades, et cetera, number of kids taking AP classes, all these indicators, which were ways in which this case, the people of Santa Monica said, these are the things that matter to us about our community. And then we can map through all the big data that's available how well we're performing on all these. Now, all of these have an underlying physical determinant. There's underlying all these is some aspect of the built environment. And so my point about the zoning was that rather than fixing our codes for 20 years, while these factors are continually evolving, we should think about how we adjust, how we're designing, how we're building, the energy efficiency of what we're building, the affordability of what we're building, et cetera, so that we're continually progressing towards the vision. And we have the big data to be able to do that. There's also something called Urban Footprint, which is a software that allows you to do scenario planning. So you can do something called future casting. You can actually take your vision for the future. You can, in a way, guesstimate. You can run 10,000 iterations, and you can say, well, let's say if we had more single-family houses, or let's say the schools were better, or let's say there's this, or let's say there's that. You can try all these different factors, and you see what the consequences, the economic consequences are, the traffic consequences are, the environmental consequences, et cetera. And you can run all these different variations to kind of find the one that seems to be the best balance for what your goals and objectives are. So that when you're making forward planning moves, they're not just guesses. So now you've got this big data information, and you've got this future planning forecasting capacity, and you can more dynamically adjust to achieve to the vision that you want to get to. I'm going to skip through these things. It's just examples of green building. So one of the things that I was asked to talk about was actually development models. This is a development model that our company put forward 25 years ago. So this is in Denver. This is a site that's about 10 minutes from the downtown. It's called, in Highland Gardens, it's called Highland Garden Village. And this is an old abandoned amusement park. And one of the things that was proposed for it was big box retail. This is actually a photo of big box retail from your region. And to be honest, this is a pretty sterile form of community development. And if you think about it, if you were one of the people living on one of those houses on the edge of this, it's not exactly the best neighbor. And this is something that the residents of Highland Gardens in Denver turned down. And so what we put in its place, this is some other Ohio images, this is what actually people want. They'd like single-family houses in urban areas to be more dense and more walkable, but they want their own houses. They want lively main streets. All these things are part of the historic Ohio fabric in the pre-1950 Ohio. And so what we did is, this is the now built-out project, and if you look at, it's a little hard to see this in aerial photo, but in the lower left there is the neighborhood existing single-family houses. So we put single-family next to them. We put the multifamily and the higher density uses more interior to the site. And then in the northern part of the top part of the picture, I'll show you there's a commercial district that we built facing the retail street. So every aspect of the project faced its neighbors with like kind. But one of the things we did is we created a lot of mix, because one of the goals was to create enough affordable housing. And affordable housing, so we're going to get to a little later, is a critical element of opportunity. But I'm just going to speak one piece about it now. There is not a single county in America where if somebody works a full-time minimum wage job, they can afford to rent a 2-bedroom apartment. So it's a parent with a child. And there's only 16 counties, and those are very, very rural counties like Arizona, et cetera, where you can afford to rent a 1-bedroom apartment, even on a full-time minimum wage job. So affordability, it turns out, is a key part of creating family stability and moving into the American dream. In this image, we're standing in a community garden. There's this whole pathway. Remember, I talked about how important nature is. So even though this is denser than the surrounding community, has many more acres of parks and open space. To the left, the purple building is a form of denser housing called co-housing. Then the next building is mixed income rental housing. Next are townhouses, and next are single family houses. And instead of segregating them, we're all integrated into a common fabric of a community. This is a new building, but it's facing buildings across the street that look almost the same. But these have behind them, they have an accessory apartment over the garage. So it actually, although it's in a single family lot, it's double the density. This is a really great way to create affordable housing and double the density with having almost no neighborhood impact. So it's an accessory apartment, and the accessory apartments may be used for grown children who've come back, or for elderly parents who you're taking care of, or for a young family that you're renting to, is just getting started, that needs cheap housing that you can rent to, provide supplemental income to actually support the mortgage on the main house. So what we have found is that accessory apartments, they dramatically improve the functioning of the main family. So, for example, the family in back may help provide babysitting. Maybe a young couple that kind of helps babysit when or help when you work. We found a pattern of physical therapists, et cetera, or nurses renting in back, and part of maybe they don't pay rent, or in exchange they provide services to an elderly couple who's in the main house. Or there are many, many different ways to do it, but. At any rate, single-family houses with accessory apartments is a great way to provide affordable housing, build fabric of community, and double density without it appearing to do so. This is co-housing, which is very small single-family houses and townhouses that are then connected to a commons house, where there are libraries and daycare rooms and community rooms and larger things to share. The whole gardening network, we built a gardening club, and so all these fantastic parks and gardens that weave this community together are maintained by volunteers, and there are different kinds of gardens everywhere within this These are some of the single-family houses. One of the things we paid a lot of attention to is Denver has a water shortage. It's in a drier state, and so we have these beautiful curving streets with tree lawns. But we noticed that we were using a lot of water, so we replaced these with plants that were low water using, but they're also kind of ugly. So we brought in Denver Botanic Gardens and now designed these beautiful tree lawns that need no water or pesticides. And actually they don't need mowing, they're just there. So they are much more environmentally responsible and they're beautiful. This is mixed income senior housing on site. This is live work housing. So the ground floor of all these are small offices or workspaces and then duplex apartments above. And then the whole shopping center. This was the first LEED Gold shopping center in the United States, an affordable health food store, day lit. And a whole series of stores all focused on, a green, non-toxic cleaner and a family medical practice and 24-hour fitness for exercise and all kinds of whole range of stores that are all providing affordable services, but all focused on the health and well-being of not only the residents of this project, but the neighborhood. And because it was an amusement park, we saved the old theater and we turned it into, it's been restored, and this is movie night outside of the theater. And we believe that every community should have a non-denominational spiritual heart too. We took this old shell of a carousel building and built in the center of it a labyrinth that people can walk in for meditation. I was giving a class recently, and I presented this. It was actually a class at MIT, and during the question and answer period, a guy said, I live 3 blocks from this place, and I actually go there and meditate, and I actually, walk my dog in your dog park, and I garden in your gardens, and everything the guy said is true. So I want to end with this. I've talked to you several times about the idea of opportunity, and after this, then we'll go to questions. So I want to talk about what is it that it really takes to build opportunity. So the first thing, as I mentioned, is affordable housing. There are 20 million American families today that spend more than 50% of their income on housing. And when they do that, there's really little, you think about it, we've got to pay taxes too, there's really little left to invest in our children. There's less for healthcare and clothing, but also for music lessons or anything that could help advance them. When families move from spending 50% of their income on housing to 30% income, statistically, they will live 8 years longer. Their children perform much better in school, have much higher high school graduation rates, etc. So affordable housing is really key to opportunity. And then the next one is education. And we know how important, particularly as I mentioned, with the robots are coming in artificial intelligence, the jobs of the future are all going to take. They're going to require more advanced education. I want to note, by the way, that there is a tremendous growing shortage of what we call technical workforce jobs. So, for example, the average age of an electric lineman is 63 years old, and they are going to retire soon. America is about to go through a vast expansion of this electric grid because the only way we can meet our climate goals is to have more electric cars. As you've seen, General Motors says by 2035, we're only going to be making electric cars. And the only way to electrify our buildings, to make our buildings non-polluting, is to turn them into all electric. And this is great because it's going to create millions of jobs for small businesses with trucks that can be helping convert the homes, and the electric utilities and others, people who make the equipment for this vast conversion. But we're going to need to train an enormous workforce. So when I say education, not all the jobs are going to require PhDs or master's degrees or even college degrees, but there's going to be an enormous need for a technical education to match a workforce with the jobs that are coming. We all know how important healthcare is, and one of the things that we really learned from the pandemic is that we're all in this together. From a public health point of view, the better the health of our neighbors, the better our own health is too. And so we need to continually think about how we can improve the healthcare system. I talked about parks and open space. We now know that having access to people who are living near parks actually weigh less because whether they're walking or running, they tend to exercise more. They have better mental health. Actually, people who live on streets with more trees have better mental health. A whole series of positive benefits that come from open space. And open spaces are incredibly egalitarian. You know, a park is open to all. Neighborhood serving markets, we've again seen this in the pandemic, how important local markets are. We've actually seen food businesses thrive. What we've been seeing, interestingly, is a hybrid emergence where people are ordering things online but picking them up physically in physical stores. One of the things that's come out globally, in France, they came up with an idea called a 15-minute neighborhood, which means that everything you need is within 15 minutes of where you live. And in many ways, the pandemic really showed how important this is. And again, it's a great way to create small businesses and small business ownership growth. So we talk a lot about jobs. I actually believe a lot in ownership. I don't believe we need to rebalance even our statistical looks. We look at unemployment returning. We should be also looking at the degree to which small businesses are returning and are thriving. Arts and culture is really, really critical. And the Columbus region has some wonderful resources in this area, but the reason why it's important. So when we talk about the jobs of the 21st century, they're going to be jobs of collaboration. They're going to be jobs of symbolic thought. So what's interesting is when a child learns to play a violin or a cello and become part of a string quartet, they're learning to actually look at a piece of paper with little dots on it and sticks on it and translate that into movements of their fingers. That intellectual capacity that's being developed is critical to actually becoming a coder or becoming a software developer or functioning in what is really going to be the future increasingly software-driven world. And that ability to sit and listen to your companions and kind of play in harmony and in rhythm with them is a critical skill in terms of being parts of teams. And we know that more and more business success is about teams. So arts and culture are really wonderful in their own right, but they're also critical training vehicles for the kind of functioning world we're going to have in the future. Access and transit, the number one thing that Americans say they hate the most is being stuck in traffic. And so creating, and by the way, I live an hour north of New York City. There's a fantastic train line that goes from within a mile of my home to Grand Central within a block and a half of my office. And I love the train because I can read and think, and it's quiet, it's air conditioned in the summer, it's heated in the winter. We need to provide, there will be more people doing more work from home, but we need to provide transit systems and ways that people can get from here to there that they actually love versus hate. Livelihood is about jobs, but it's also about ownership. And as the United States, we have the highest level of home ownership of any country in the world, I believe, although that's been declining. We've been moving more to a renter society. And as I said, I think we need, when we think about livelihood, the way that families really benefit from economic prosperity is when they own the business and maybe even own the building that the business is in. As prosperity takes place. And I've seen this in many, many communities that have moved from being challenged communities to thriving communities, that those who had ownership in the transition did well. So livelihood, I want us to think not only just about jobs, about ownership. And the last one I put here is spiritual. And that is, we need a value system that is larger than ourselves. We need a care for creation, a care for earth, a compassionate care for our fellow human beings and for all of nature. And my sense is without that, we will never become truly the the land of opportunity, the land of milk and honey that I hope that and envision that we can become. I have a whole bunch of slides, which I'm not going to go through now, which show you how you actually can deliver these things, because I'd love to move from this to questions. So I'm going to end the slideshow and stop screen sharing. And
hi, Jonathan.
Hello.
Thank you so much for this great presentation and all this good information, and thank you for being here today. As William said, I wish we could have been in person, but it's still wonderful that we have this opportunity to at least virtually meet and for you to share your wisdom and your experience with us, and for us now to have this really short conversation together. So I know when we prepared for your talk today, we shared with you that we just recently completed a regional housing strategy. So this information that you're sharing with us is really timely. And the strategy really shed light on 5 core issues related to housing competition and barriers to building more and more diverse and lower priced housing and barriers to access housing. And then the strategy brought out over 100 action items that the region as a whole could undertake to ensure that every resident has the opportunity to obtain safe and decent housing at price points that support their incomes. And I have to say, when we undertook the regional housing strategy, what really spurred my passion for it was thinking about the many residents in the service or manufacturing industry who are trying to make ends meet on minimal wage and just struggling to find decent housing in neighborhoods of their choice that they can afford. And because of policies and programs in the past, and many, unfortunately, that still exist today, you know, we have racially and economically segregated many of our communities, which has really deprived people from opportunities to access of good schools and jobs and even other amenities such as parks or fresh markets that other neighborhoods with higher income, you know, do enjoy. And I do know that, you know, a lot of your company is focused on mixed income development and really combined with sustainable practices, which is awesome. And so I'm sure that you also, in your line of work, experience NIMBYism, not in my backyard. It's a big issue here for a lot of our local governments. And you know, we're working actually with our local BIA right now to really quantify how many units may have been lost to the region because of the strong public opposition. And so my question to you is, how do you typically approach NIMBYism? And in your research, have you come across other countries or examples where NIMBYism is not as much of a problem because of the different way they engage the public or the processes that are in place?
Great question. So first of all, many countries have many different ways of dealing with development approval. We happen to be a very, you know, we're a federated system, so every state has control, and then we're all local, et cetera. Whereas many other countries have national planning, and they so they have a larger, you know, so they're not as stuck on kind of local opposition to creating development. But if you really go back to the turn of the between the 19th and 20th century, there was very little NIMBYism because we were a country of enormous optimism about the future. And every time we built something, typically we were making it better. So if you think about, look at the history of even Columbus, but any of the Ohio towns, and they were around in 1900, and look what they were, and then what they were in 1910 and 1920. And you know, there were libraries being built and main streets were growing and small offices and buildings were, you know, I've looked at old historic photos and they were great. So one of the reasons people didn't oppose the development was because the development was really delivering value to them. Then if you look at the development in the 60s, 70s, 80s, often what was being built, people felt was declining their value. So one of the things I want to say is that NIMBYism is a serious problem, but in part, it's based on a real sense that increased development, we reached a time in our history in which increased development potentially could make things worse and not better. So one of the things we need is a vision, which I've said, of what is better, number one. And number two, we need development models of what is better. So one of the things we've always really focused on is architectural excellence. Basically, people don't like big, ugly buildings next to them. And people may not want more development, but they will be more accepting of development that meets the scale of the neighborhood, that respects and that feels like it's going to improve the neighborhood. So remember when I showed you Highland Garden Village, I said, which is 4 or 5 times denser than the surrounding neighborhood, but I showed you that we face single-family houses with single-family houses. We didn't say to a single-family house, you're going to have an affordable housing multifamily next door to you. And I think that strategy really made a difference. The second thing we said is we're going to be much denser, but we're going to give you a bunch of things that you value. So we created this beautiful park system. It's not a gated community, it's open to all. So all the neighbors now who want to walk their dog or have a picnic or whatever, we created a resource for them. In the shopping center, so people are concerned about more retail because it creates more traffic, but we brought in affordable neighborhood serving retailers that work for them. So I do think it's important to listen to the concerns of neighbors. Okay, I gotta say, so that's one key point. The other is, remember I ended with a spiritual question, which is I think that I was going to call it a challenge. It's not a challenge. It's a statement that we really need to build a culture that we're all in it together. I have been in community meetings where people stand up and are just nasty. And they're just nasty to be nasty. I mean, they sound like they're raising good points and all that, but you can see really underline it. They just want to say no. And they may even be saying no to things they don't understand or even aren't really in their neighborhood. And that's a cultural we have become a culture in America in many ways that has, so before 1990, we had a sense of manners in America that that anger was, we were supposed to be well behaved in public, and we've given permission to be much more angry in public. And I think we need to figure out culturally how we dial that back. And that may even be how we moderate our meetings. So I don't know if all this was helpful to you, but those are a couple thoughts about how to deal with NIMBYism.
No, I agree. Those are both really excellent points. And honestly, it brings me back to your book and the title of your book called Well-Tempered. It's such a great terminology. And I have to say that title alone is really what drew me to your book in the first place. And I loved your intro where you explained how you came up with this term through Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier. And then it brought me back to my childhood growing up in Germany. And Sundays were rest days. You know, none of the shops, restaurants, anything was open. And so our house was always filled with classical music. So thank you for allowing me to have that memory as I was reading your book too. But also, as you just mentioned, the term well-tempered really seems even more important in today's political climate, because it would be so much nicer if people, instead of anger or frustration or aggravation, would approach everything and everyone in life with well-temper, and I think we would have very different conversation, as you pointed out. But in your book, you also give a great history lesson on urban planning all the way back to the early beginnings of human socialization. And you share what we can learn from these lessons. You use a lot of C words in your book to do so. You share that the unified theory of urban history is grounded in 5 core concepts: coherence, circularity, resilience, community, and compassion. And then you also identify 9 variables that were really critical to the rise of ancient cities: cognition, cooperation, culture, calories or energy, connectivity, commerce, control, complexity, and concentration. And then you take a look at many European cities and their history to really understand what works and what doesn't. And so my question, I guess, to you is, with having done all this research and having gone so far back into history, you know, what would you say has been your biggest aha moment throughout this research that has really transformed your view of urban development? Or maybe more specifically, what advice would you give to our local government officials and planners when it comes to urban design and urban planning? And do you think there's a difference for communities that are more focused on an urban core versus those that are, you know, thinking about smaller towns or rural counties?
Thank you. Great question. So first of all, just to answer your last question, human beings, so since we're designing settlements for humans, and we're all kind of have the same basic core instincts and needs and desires, etc. Although the way we manifest them in cities versus towns and villages is different because the physical conditions are different, and so our downtowns may, for example, we're now seeing in most cities that they're just eliminated. Buildings are being built without any parking at all because communities are mixed use enough and walkable enough that you may not need parking, whereas obviously in a suburban shopping center, you're going to need parking. So there'll be variations, but essentially human needs are the same. And so those 9 C's which you listed, and which I encourage if people want to have more detail, they can read, was really interesting. So what I was trying to figure out is, how do we get to the first city? Because remember, there was a time in which we were all hunter-gatherers, and then we had these first little villages. And what were the patterns in that? Because I sensed that they were universal patterns, and they still are. So I'm just going to step one little piece about the evolution of human settlement. The very first building was actually a temple, and the early buildings were temples. People may be living in caves or in thatched huts, but they built these incredible religious places, and that required a coordination of hundreds of people as volunteers, most likely, to build these. There's a great archaeologist who said, first came the temple, then came the city. And what I recognized was that this core spirituality is essentially about a desire to make sense of the larger universe, and a temple is a place. It's a place in which it's a refuge, it's a sanctuary, and it's also a place of great expansion, and it's a place of community, the congregation. And those are cores of every city and the beginning of cities throughout much of history. That sense that there is some place that kind of aligns humans and nature, that there's some place that's a sanctuary, there's some place that communities gather in goodwill. The second thing is that early on, as little villages got created, they differentiated. So some were growing figs, and some were growing olives, and some were raising sheep, and some were raising goats, and some were selling, goat hair, and some were raising cows, and some were growing wheat. And they're all doing different things, and they began to trade because they had difference. A psychologist named Dan Siegel says the healthy mind integrates differentiated parts. The healthy civilization integrates differentiated parts. If everybody has the same thing, there's no point in trading. It's this differentiation that really matters. And so when you think about a healthy region, what you want to do is most easily connect, and you want coherence and wholeness, but you absolutely need differentiation, because if it's same everywhere, why bother going from one place to another? And it's the diversity, the differentiation, just like the diversity of a gene pool, that really gives rise to the thriving of the community. And when you interconnect differentiated parts, the archaeologists call that an interaction zone. And the interaction zone is what really creates more prosperity for all. Okay, so now the question is, how do you translate this into planning? And the challenge is then in each community to try and understand. So remember, NIMBYism is about what we're not going to be. So the alternative question is, what are we best at? What could our community most uniquely and coherently contribute to the whole of this region? What's our piece? What's our role? And how do we grow towards that role? And if you can get all that integrated in a coherent pattern, it makes for a really long-term, healthy, thriving, integrated region.
That's beautiful. Honestly, Jonathan, I could talk to you for another hour easily, but I know we're running out of time. So I want to end with a compliment to you, and then also with one last question that's really focused on you. And so the older I get, and the more I'm exposed to CEOs and public leaders, the more I really appreciate and admire leaders who are kind, who are approachable, and who are respectful, no matter who they're talking to. And you are certainly one of those leaders. I remember when I first approached you last year at the ULI conference, it was right before before COVID hit and we were still able to travel, you made it really easy for me to talk to you, and you were truly present throughout that conversation too. And so I really want to thank you for that. But then looking on your website and reading about your mission statement, it seems that this kind and thoughtful approach to life really has been infiltrated your entire company. So on your mission statement, you say, restoring the promise of communities. We support the well-being of communities by creating environmentally, socially, and economically responsible projects and plans that equalize the landscape of opportunity for their residents and improve the balance of humans and nature. Can you tell us a little bit more, very briefly, what inspired you to start a company that's really focused on these key principles?
Yes. So, and just one more thing that I want to note, that our company does very well. And so I don't want to go back to our founding. So I was in a family real estate business. I was always very interested in social justice because I grew up in the civil rights period, always interested in environmental protection because I love nature. And I love building and my father had a family real estate business, and I used to visit construction sites with him on weekends and stuff. And I wanted to figure out how you could put all those things together. And there wasn't really a model for that. And in the 1960s and 70s, and the 70s really when I set out on my career, so I kind of had to figure it out. In 1987, I joined a group of people called the Social Venture Network that had just got formed. And it included Ben & Jerry of Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream. They're very funny guys, by the way. And Anita Roddick, who just founded The Body Shop, and John Mackey, who had started Whole Foods. He had one Whole Foods store at the time, and a bunch of other really interesting people. They were amazing entrepreneurs. They're building fantastic businesses, and they were all deeply socially and environmentally motivated. And it struck me, if they can do this in what were essentially consumer products, I certainly should be able to do this in real estate. And so in 1989, I left my family business, inspired by these other businesses, and said, can I make a for-profit real estate company that can grow by doing good? And we've been doing that ever since. We started as 2 people, we're now 450.
It's incredible. Well, thank you so much again for sharing your insights and ideas with us and for having this open conversation with me today. And as I said when we met in Florida, as soon as we can gather with other people again, I will also sign up for one of your retreats at the Garrison Institute. But with this, I'm going to ask William to come back and close us out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Kirsten. What a great conversation today, and a timely one. At MORPC, we believe in Central Ohio's future, but we're only going to succeed when everyone's heard and the whole region's at the table. We need your help. If we plan together, the region can really get better as we grow bigger. So that's it today. Thank you for being our partners and friends. We're looking forward to the work ahead. We so appreciate you being here today. Thank you again. Be well.